Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Take a look at this 2-minute video clip from Gatineau, Quebec.
No, c'est le! No, c'est le! No, c'est le!
Il peut plus respirer, arrête! Arrête, il peut plus respirer!
Don't fucking do that!
Okay, calm down.
Calmez-vous, ok? Okay, we're calm. Don't do that!
J'ai un bébé.
We're people!
Hey! Non, lâchez-les, s'il vous plaît, là. S'il vous plaît, les gars, là. Hey, lâchez-les, là, ils sont 3 dessus, là.
Tu fermes la porte.
Hey, non, ils sont 3 dessus, là.
Yeah?
Hey, ils sont 3 dessus, là.
Get the in there! Jesus Christ! Ça va être pire, arrête! Things worse!
No!
Yes! What are you gonna do now? Stay there! You have a shoes for the video? You have a shoes? You have a shoes?
Hey, c'est ça de là, comment, genre?
Hey, vous avez pas le droit de tirer quelqu'un de la maison.
Je sais pas qu'est-ce qui s'est passé.
Vous avez pas le droit.
Avez-vous des
Moi, je veux voir votre sergent.
Avez-vous des chaussures?
Non, j'ai pas de celui.
You have a shoes?
Non, j'en ai pas de celui.
Donne-y ça. Attends, au toi, là. Oh my God.
Deuxième mandat? Moi, je vais voir votre mandat, vous vous retenez. Non.
C'est juste de collaborer.
Hey, c'est quoi? Vous m'avez tiré en bois. On a sa caméra sur un tabarnak. Vous avez tiré mon fils.
Écoutez, madame, si vous avez un problème, notre sergent il est en route.
C'est tant mieux.
OK? Vous n'êtes pas d'accord au travail policier, vous avez des recours, vous les prendrez.
Merci.
après.
Close the door. Close the door. I don't want to see those people anymore.
Just a shocking video. According to the Journal de Montréal, it was a neighbor who snitched on this family for having a quiet dinner in with a grand total of 6 people in the house. Well, there were 6 police dispatched to the scene, violently pulling a man out of the building, forcing him face down in the snow and the asphalt. You'll notice the police themselves were not all wearing masks. The shouting, the screaming, literally pulling a man out of his house. They did not have a search warrant, if you wonder. I put it to you that if that video were not in French and English as it was, but rather if it were in Chinese or the Persian language Farsi, if that video came to us from China or Iran, we would call it evidence of a police state, of brutality. Well, my friends, this wasn't from there. This was from Canada. It's now January 4th. That video came out on New Year's Eve, and I have yet to see a single politician speak out against this. Granted, I'm not following the French language politicians, but where is the rest of the civil libertarians? Where are the opposition parties whose duty it is to oppose? I grant you that this happened in Gatineau, Quebec, but it's similar things across the country, whether it's threatening to taser a young man on a skating rink in Calgary or simply slapping a company-destroying fine on a small business. People are starting to get upset. This video from Gatineau was so shocking, I tweeted it. And take a look at this. This may not mean anything to you, but according to Twitter analytics, my one tweet was seen more than 10 million times in my 10 years on that time-wasting social app. I've never had a tweet seen by 10 million people before. Even Donald Trump Jr. retweeted it as a cautionary tale. Imagine that. Well, the Gatineau police, they made excuses for their officers. That's the instinct of all police. And their excuses falling apart, saying that, well, they didn't have time to put a mask and their police were assaulted so badly they had to fight back. No, people weren't buying it. And so during this period, when we were watching these shocking videos that had come home, people started to ask, where are our politicians? Has anyone seen Justin Trudeau lately? Has anyone seen Jagmeet Singh lately? Has anyone seen any of the fancy people who are part of the ruling class locking us down lately? The police chief that ordered this police misconduct, where's he over this cold, dreary Christmas? Christmases in Canada can be cold and dreary anyways, but add the lockdowns, not able to visit family, not able to go to restaurants. And people started making inquiries about what politicians were traveling where. Not because we're anti-travel, but because, as the politicians always said, are we really all in this together? And names started to be smoked out from people who were perhaps careless about their sneaky plans. And that's the first thing I want to tell you. Every politician who left Canada during the lockdown, these are the lockdown implementers, every single one of them themselves tried to misdirect or fake the fact, fake that they were still here where they were gone. Rod Phillips, the former finance minister of Ontario, did that with a deceptive broadcast, pretending that he was in Canada on Christmas. And so it was with Tracy Allard, the municipal affairs minister of Alberta, someone with very little political track record, a first-term MLA from Grand Prairie. She thought she's had such an exhausting year that she jetted off to Hawaii. Now, I have no problem with jetting off anywhere or to Hawaii. I do know that we're told not to engage in, quote, non-essential travel by both provincial and federal governments. And from a practical point of view, even if I chose to go to Hawaii, I'd have to quarantine for 2 weeks upon my return. Who can afford a vacation plus a 2-week quarantine other than the ruling class that gets paid no matter what? The political class, the bureaucracy class. I'd love to go to Hawaii myself, but I can't take a vacation plus a 2-week added on vacation. No one real can do that. Imagine a cabinet minister enforcing an emergency lockdown, thinking things were so non-emergent that she could just scupper off to Hawaii. Well, pressure started to build, and on New Year's Day, Jason Kenney, the premier himself, did something quite odd. He had a press conference where he was the star, not Tracy Allard, the disgraced cabinet minister, whose excuse was, well, it's a family tradition. Don't you see how important this family tradition is? We all have our family traditions, Tracy, and we've all had to give quite a few of them up. For some reason, Jason Kenney, rather than putting out a press statement firing her, rather than making her face the cameras, as Rod Phillips did in Ontario, Jason Kenney himself had a press conference. Now, the first thing he said was quite thoughtful. He said, we shouldn't lock down the travel industry. We can travel safely. There are ways to do it, and it's so important for our Alberta economy because of WestJet. Here's part of that.
All of this is to say that Alberta has sought to support and facilitate safe travel during the COVID era. We've done so as part of our effort to protect both lives and livelihoods. Completely shutting down travel would result not only in tens of thousands of more job losses, but would likely result in the financial collapse of Canada's airline industry, which is an essential part of a modern economy. For Alberta, that is particularly the case for WestJet. If all or almost all travel was to be suspended, I do not believe that WestJet could survive. And the failure of that company would frankly be a catastrophe for Alberta's economy and for our prospects of recovery and economic diversification in the future.
I agree completely. In fact, I think that there are too many restrictions on travel. There's no need for many of the rules against planes. And by the way, once you're on a plane, you can take your mask off and have a drink of water or coffee or peanuts or whatever. I mean, the idea that you have to go through social distancing and wear masks, but then you take it off for an hour, it's ridiculous. But I agree with him on the travel, but that really wasn't the point. No one's against Hawaii. No one's against travel. People are against lockdown brutalizers, then skipping town to avoid their own lockdown. They're against ministers who shut down restaurants in Alberta, going to restaurants in Waikiki instead. And here's where Jason Kenney went off the rails. He said it was sort of his fault that he didn't make this clear enough to his own people. Here, take a look.
This past Tuesday afternoon, I became aware that Minister of Municipal Affairs Tracy Allard had traveled to the United States before Christmas. I immediately contacted the minister and asked her to return to Alberta, which she did immediately, arriving back yesterday morning. I should be clear that while away, Minister Allard continued to work on her important responsibilities. I was on calls and participated in virtual cabinet committee meetings in recent days in which she was an active participant. I've also become aware that a few MLAs, political staff, and senior government officials have traveled abroad in recent weeks. In doing so, I'm assured that they have complied with all relevant public health orders and legal requirements. Nevertheless, I recognize that those of us in positions of public trust must maintain a higher standard in our personal conduct than is expected of the folks in the general population, in the general community. And here I take responsibility for not having clearly set out or communicated a policy against international travel for senior decision makers in government. I should have done so. To be blunt, I'm not in the habit of tracking or regulating what the people who work for me do on their personal time. I believe that these individuals acted in what they believe to be good faith, have complied with the legal requirements, including the COVID public health orders. But for those of us in leadership, I acknowledge that is not good enough. We should be here at home, plain and simple, if we carry a position of public trust.
Oh, the press were enraged. Not just the leftist media party that always hates Jason Kenney, but conservatives like our friend Rick Bell of the Calgary Sun. No one could believe the tone deafness to it. And in my mind, it's because even the United Conservative Party, which I put it to you is Canada's most conservative provincial government, even they live in a capital city surrounded by the ruling class, by government bureaucrats, by people who love the lockdown. At worst, they just stay home and watch Netflix while collecting their paycheck. So I think that there is a disconnect between the rage felt by small businesses, working class people, people whose lives have been negatively impacted by the lockdown, and the ruling class that said, oh yeah, go off to Hawaii. We had set up a website called fireallard.com, and we were making campaign plans. In fact, over the weekend, I reached out to the largest radio station in Grande Prairie, Alberta, where we happen to have more than 3,000 Rebel supporters. We were going to get radio ads, we were going to get billboards, we were going to do lawn signs. I thought that Jason Kenney was going to pull the plug on Tracy Allard on January 1st, but he didn't. He let the wound fester for 3 full days. And then today, a bloodletting of the sort I haven't seen, well, actually in memory. Jason Kenney sacking every single one of his caucus who took foreign trips. Tracy Allard was just the beginning of it. Others were stripped of their cabinet and even committee positions. And most stinging of all, Jason Kenney sacked his own chief of staff. That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.